a rule of reach out. Whenever you are reaching out to someone, never, ever, ever say them, hey, how can I get started? Hey, how can you explain to me, or can you assign this to me directly? Without the assignment is fine, but don't never reach out saying that, just help me get started on this. That is a very annoying question because of the sheer number of times we receive that question. So don't do that. One thing I said in open source, you have to read things before saying anything or asking for help. My very first open source project that I wanted to work with, I just commented, hey, help me, explain me, like, without doing any research on my own. And the maintainer of that project said that, no, we don't want you. We don't want such a contributor, which was very hurtful at that time, which is still not the best practice a maintainer should follow. And that was wrong on their behalf at that time. But at the same time, maintainers receive a lot of questions like these, how to get started, etc. So whenever you are trying to actually contribute, always do your research beforehand, do your homework. If you show that you have done some work before sending this message, how do I get started? Then the chances of you getting a reply and you getting some actual mentorship is a lot higher. Should Kubernetes be the first code open source project you start with? I don't know. Yeah. Well, that's on you. Would I recommend it? Absolutely. Not absolutely, but not. I wouldn't recommend it. Okay. But if you are someone who's in college, who's looking for the first open source project, it would be good if you can understand the Kubernetes code base and work with the community and basically develop features. But since Kubernetes is very large and it's fairly mature, I would say, the areas in which you can contribute to code directly and then the feedback cycle might be a bit longer than on some sandbox CNCF project or something of that level. So I myself started with another CNCF project and not Kubernetes directly, and I think that approach works pretty well. So what I mean by you should not dive into Kubernetes code base is you cannot just wake up and start doing a major get for API machinery, because that's going to be very complicated. But it does not mean that there aren't any other areas in which you can contribute via code to the project. So if you go to kubernetes.dev, you would find all these resources there, like SIGs that are there, their charters, the links to those things, and various tutorials as well. So you basically have to read or watch some videos and do your research to understand things better. The answer you're expecting from someone, how do I get started? Well, that answer is already written over here. And if you read a lot of this or most of it, you will understand how can you get started basically on your own without getting the same generic reply from someone. So if you're used to Stack Overflow, I don't know if a lot of people now even remember that. It was a thing in which you would ask questions to actual humans and they would respond with answers. And they had a very strict policy around asking questions. If you said, hey, this is not working, fix it for me, you would get downvoted and your question would be deleted. So you had to make sure that your question adhered to a particular standard, which was, hey, this is not working. I have tried X, Y, Z. I have also seen that some people have done this, but I tried that as well. It didn't work for me. Can someone help me troubleshoot this? So you enumerated your question. You said what you have done. You said, I saw the people doing this. I tried this. It didn't work for me. Can someone help me? So if you ask a more detailed question, people would be happier and they would actually feel good that someone is actually trying to contribute to the SIG rather than just asking a very generic question. So go into any of these meetings, but always do your research beforehand. So you see this is the structure of the Kubernetes project. And when I expand it, you see the bar going shrinking, shrinking, and shrinking. There are a lot of files here to go through and figure out what's happening. It's a very large code base indeed. But honestly, never get intimidated by how large a code base is. You don't need to know everything to fix something or to work on something. For example, I'm reading the code of the namespace controller now. I have read this code before, but I read this code today only, like just a few hours before this meeting, and I will exactly mimic like how I read this code. So I read the constant declaration was, you have to get to a level where you are recognized as a potential contributor. When you're at that level and you're working on a particular feature, it's very natural for you to not understand everything, face errors, and make mistakes, write bad code, etc. That's the job of reviewers. And when they start reviewing your code, they become your mentors in a way. They tell you, hey, this is wrong with your code, you should do it like this. And I've had it so many times, hey, you have implemented this is logically correct, but there's a better way of doing this, or there's a cleaner way of writing this thing of code. And I have opened PRs which receive like 200 of these comments. Do this like this, do this like these. And my mentor said to me that I am only doing this because I know you would love to know these things. If you were not putting equal amounts of efforts as I am, I wouldn't be doing this at all. Yeah. This happened in a very recent open source project I contributed to. So they knew that I was serious about it, and then they were. So you have to get serious about it. Watch a podcast like this, maybe watch another one. But if you're just watching podcasts, you're not fooling anyone. You're just bullshitting around and you won't learn anything.
And one last one is one word advice for new contributors.
One word, right?
Yeah. Is it going to be read or something?
Read? What?
Read.
Oh, read. I thought you said read. I'm like, no. What the hell?
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Nitish, and in this video, we're going to talk with Vyom about a lot of different stuff, especially related to Kubernetes project. How can you get started with the project? How did Vyom eventually started with the project? We'll be going through Kubernetes code base as well, trying to see how can you pick one specific component at a time, how to read the code base for the big projects. And a lot of valuable discussion will be done in this podcast. So if you're someone who's interested in contributing to the Kubernetes project or in general to any open source project, this video is the right one for you. So without any further delay, let's get started. And I'll first of all start with an introduction of Vyom. Vyom, thanks for joining us here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, Nitish. Hey, everyone. I am Vyom. I work in the security team at Canonical, and I've been involved in the Kubernetes. I think not just Kubernetes, but in the CNCF ecosystem for more than like 3 years now. Mm-hmm. And previous to that, I contributed to other open source projects. So I've been contributing to open source since like my freshman year. And today I'll be excited to talk about how you can contribute to Kubernetes and how you can dive into that project and the various components of Kubernetes because it's a very large project and you don't need to know how to write code to contribute to Kubernetes. There are a lot of other avenues as well. So pick what suits you, and Kubernetes has plenty of options available.
Cool. And you mentioned that you graduated. When did you graduate?
I graduated in 2024.
20, like the last year. Okay, cool. And you mentioned that you have been involved with the project like in open source from your freshman year. So it's
Yeah.
like 2020 almost.
Yeah, I'd say 2020. I think late 2020 because I started my undergrad in like September 2020. So
Hmm.
I think I picked up my first open source sort of work in November or beginning of December. So
Cool.
that's the thing.
Let's get at the back and let's see. So how's your like how did you get involved with the Kubernetes project and open source in general? Let's come to like the first freshman year, and then how did you get into Kubernetes project then?
I did not get into Kubernetes into my freshman year.
Mm.
I'll start where I got into open source in my freshman year. I worked with an organization called Checkstyle. Checkstyle is a
Yeah.
static linting tool for Java. I think that was a really good start to get started in open source because Checkstyle as a tool really focused a lot on core software components and how different pieces in software interact. And it
Hmm.
was a single monolith, so it was easier to understand as you're
Yeah.
beginning, like you are not that experienced. And at the same time, it still had the components of writing algorithms that are not really written anywhere because it's
Hmm.
just everything is so custom because it's an abstraction text tree that you have to parse and generate a module off of that. So I think that was a really good introduction. And because it was a linter, they highly focused on clean code. So I
Hmm.
learned a lot about clean coding practices and maintainable code in general. So that's my starting of open source. And after that, I transitioned and did my LFX mentorship with Kyverno. I had been curious about cloud native at that point, and I wanted to explore in that direction. So I started learning Docker, Kubernetes, of course, Linux fundamentals first. You don't jump that ladder and just two steps directly to
Yeah.
Kubernetes when you don't know anything about containerization or Linux.
Hmm.
So I started learning that, but then after that, I applied to the Linux Foundation mentorship program, and
Hmm.
I've worked with Kyverno, which is an admission controller for Kubernetes, to
Hmm.
work on something called a sub-resources support. So that was my first interaction with a cloud native computing foundation project. And after that, I got started into the Kubernetes ecosystem. Now, of course,
Hmm.
when you are working on an admission controller, it's going to use the Kubernetes API. So you need some familiarity on that side as well.
Hmm.
So I started reading Kubernetes talks a bit, how the admission controllers work and what are the libraries I can use to work with admission controllers. So I worked on that, wrote some code there, added the support for sub resources, and then I heard about something called the Kubernetes Release Team. Um, I saw and I found that really interesting, like to be a part of the team that releases such a humongous piece of software. Well, it's
Okay.
technically the second most popular open source project after Linux, so it's a pretty big thing. So I was very curious. I applied. I did not have any expectations of getting selected, like zero. And but one thing that I did in my application form is that I actually read what was the requirement. I actually read what they said. Most of the times when you do the things as you are being told to, they work out. A lot of times people just
Hmm.
don't read. Reading is a very important thing that you should focus on if you are in open source or in software development in general.
Hmm.
Don't go to Claude for everything. Try to read things on your own first. Claude is good
Yeah.
and all. But I read quite a few things like all the handbooks that were there and what were the role expectations and formed a picture in my mind. And I tried to relate it to my experience when I was applying for the Shadow application program for the release team. And luckily I got selected for the in the very
And which
first
year was it when you got selected for the first time in the release team?
try. Oh, I'm bad with numbers. But this was I was back in 1.27. 1.27 was my first cycle. So 27, 28, 29, 30, 31,
That's like
33, 34.
3 years ago, maybe
Yeah, so
2 to 3 years ago.
yeah, I've been on the release team for 8 cycles and it was like 3 years ago. I forgot to tell one thing. interned at a company called Equinox, and they built a CNC project called CubeArmor. So I worked with that as well. Like that was the, I think that was alongside release team that was working on CubeArmor. So that was another CNC project that I worked with, and yeah, that was also quite fun. Like
So you were
running
doing
a
all
code.
these, you were doing a bunch of these things together, like contributing to the Kubernetes project and then also interning at Equinox.
Yeah, so my LFX mentorship ended with a slight overlap with the release team. And
Mhm.
when my LFX mentorship ended, so during the mentorship, we decided to go with approach A. But then when we deployed that approach to production, we were like, there are some limitations, and this causes a lot of friction on how various components interact and how users configure them. So we were like, we would drop support for a few things, to keep user friction less. And so the approach kind of shifted. So because I was involved in that project, I still like felt it was my responsibility at least to approve the software design, etc., of the new approach,
Mhm.
because we were basically transitioning from pod slash exec, which is basically to exec into a pod. It's a sub resource, and the actual resource name is pod exec options. So there is no relation between these two strings, and you cannot convert from one string to another without having a live API server running. So that was the problem statement, but we eventually decided that we're gonna drop support for one of them. Now I forgot for
Mhm.
which one. So that was quite a rewrite, and I kind of worked with the Kibana team to help sort that out, and at least to even not write code, but write code for some components and review the design or the PRs for the others. So this was slight overlap with the release team, and then the Equinox internship was a complete overlap with the release team stuff.
Got it. So you were doing like trying to manage
It's
multiple things
always
at
an
once.
when you are in college, it's always an overlap with
Yeah,
everything. You won't get dedicated time frames to do anything.
absolutely. And then you have the college exams too. Got
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Okay, let's come to the Kubernetes release process now. You mentioned about something called as a release shadow program, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people who might be watching this might not be familiar with it.
Mhm.
So, wh- so what is actual like? How do you get involved with the release team? There's a release shadow program, and I think there's also something called as a release engineering team.
Yeah,
So, what's that? I would love to know about that.
right. So in Kubernetes, there are some things called as SIGs. SIGs are basically special interest groups. So it's basically grouping of particular specific areas of interest for any piece of software. For example, if you are building a local project in a college, you might have something like the front end, the back end, then you have someone who defines the database schema, scales the database, someone's managing the infra. So these are all different components in your local project. In Kubernetes, because it's slightly more complicated, there are things that we call as SIGs. So it's formalized in that terminology. So release team and the release engineering sub project, they come under SIG release, special
Mhm.
interest group release. And release team has the release team portion of the SIG release. It has something called a shadow program, in which the applications open before every cycle, and we encourage people to apply to various teams that they want to shadow in. So in the release team, we have enhancements team, we have docs team, we have communications team, and we have release signal. We also have release engineering work, but that's not usually given to first time contributors or people who are applying to the release team for the first time, because you have some privileged access to various infra resources that we have. So we need some sort of we need to see some commitment, and you need to build that trust with the community to get that elevated access for a release cycle. So those are the two aspects of the release team, and there's a lot more to talk about it.
Okay, and which team did you start with?
I started with something called CI Signal,
Okay.
but that's not a team anymore. It was
Yeah.
merged within the team. So the dynamics of the team keep changing. So we try to
Mhm.
improve the process every cycle. But I started with CI Signal in V1.27.
And you were the release lead for the version 1.34.
Right.
Yeah.
I led the V1.34 version, which was codenamed as Of Wind and Will, which was a pretty good experience, like leading that.
Where did you get the logo of it? Because I feel like that's one of the best logos ever of the Kubernetes release.
Well,
Where did
uh, uh, I so the design I wanted to do for the logo was heavily inspired by Assassin's Creed,
Okay.
Black Flag. Um, I have played a lot of Assassin's Creed and a lot of Pirates, etc. I'm not doing anything about Pirates are good or bad. You are free to decide that on your own. But well, Kubernetes is an orchestrator, right? And it works with containers. So that terminology, that naval terminology is already there. So I just built on top of that. Well, the logo of a Kubernetes is the helm of a ship, right? So it couldn't be more obvious than that. So that was also playing a lot of importance in the way I was designing the logo. And then finally, I did sort of a rough sketch on how I want things to be angled and what I want the scenario to be, what I want the environment around to be, and what I want to be on deck. And then I did the most difficult part, that was giving this to a professional artist who did this for me. Because
Got
I
it.
am not that good at like drawing digital art. I can do on paper and stuff. Like I am okay, like
Mm-hmm.
doing things on paper. But when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to doing anything like digital art, I haven't done that. So better left to the professionals, and
Mm-hmm.
that was the story of the release logo.
Got it. And do you do you recall any sort of like a behind the scenes story from a recent release that like most people outside the team wouldn't know?
Well, there are quite a few of them, but I have said a few things in like previous podcasts and stuff, like the one that maybe the public should
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
One thing a lot of folks might not know about that, there was one cap in the Kubernetes release that went GA without conformance tests. Now, conformance tests are a requirement, but the requirement that we had on paper did not actually match with the setup that we have in the Kubernetes ecosystem. So finally, it was decided in the ecosystem itself that it's fine to publish this particular cap without conformance tests, and we will improve this in the future. So this is something a lot of folks might not be aware about that
Mm-hmm.
happened in this release cycle, although it was all public on the Kubernetes
Mm-hmm.
Slack.
Mm-hmm.
But that was one of the BDS things that someone might be interested in.
Cool, cool. Let's move to the next section, which is like the contribution pathways.
Hmm.
As we mentioned, we're going to go through the controllers code base, trying to seal a specific component. But I'll hand it over to you and try to understand how do you recommend people start contributing to the project? They go
Right.
through the project, they see unit tests have been written, they see the controllers code and bunch of
Hmm.
stuff, right? Uh,
Hmm.
I would put this in two ways, like a two sub questions. The first would be very simple. It would be, how do you pick which SIG is right for you? And
Hmm.
second is people who are interested in code,
Hmm.
and especially folks who are coming to the project and they feel like, okay, let's start with Kubernetes project and try to make some code contribution there. How
Hmm.
should they do that? Or should they even start with the Kubernetes project or not? I'll leave these questions on you, and I think this is going to take a bunch of time. So I'll have to see your input on that.
Those are slightly controversial questions.
Yeah.
Should Kubernetes be the first code open source project you start with? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, that's on you. Would I recommend it? Absolutely, not absolutely, but not. I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
reason why I wouldn't recommend it is that Kubernetes is slightly complicated. It's slightly more complicated than what you're used to. I'm
Yeah.
believe me, when I'm saying open source project, I don't mean seasoned developers. So if
Mm.
you have something which is even more complex in your company and you are looking to contribute to open source, well, you might have a very established closed source or proprietary project in your company that is well tested, well documented. So this
Mhm.
is about developer, how much development experience you have. So if you have a lot of development experience, then I don't think you should have any problem understanding the Go code and Kubernetes. But if you are someone who's in college, who's looking for their first open source project, um, it would be good if you can understand the Kubernetes code base and work with the community and basically develop features. But since Kubernetes is very large and it's fairly mature, I would say, the areas in which you can contribute to code directly and then the feedback cycle might be a bit longer than on some sandbox CNCF project or something of that level. So I myself started with another CNCF project and not Kubernetes directly. And I think that approach works pretty well. So if you want to try Kubernetes, well, who am I to stop you? But I would suggest like slightly play around the ecosystem for some time and then come to Kubernetes project. Like if you want to do core contributions, if you want to do docs or something, I think that's you can do directly. You don't need to have any prior experience. The release team as well. You don't need to have any prior experience with open source. And we actually every cycle select people that don't have any experience just to make sure that we have that fairness criteria set for everyone who's applying to the team. And that's the gist about it. If you want to, why not? Would I suggest it? Maybe not.
Got it. Okay. And I remember like I tried to start with contributions to Kubernetes project in my freshman year. And soon after a point of time, I realized I need to shift to like a smaller project because this project is such a big project. And I even if I like try to, let's say, learn a very small piece of code, it's not going to teach me a bunch of stuff as I would try to learn it in a small project. So that's a very good suggestion. Another question that I had, yeah.
One caveat in that suggestion that I should probably mention because
Hmm.
I should mention this. So what I mean by you should not dive into Kubernetes code base is you cannot just wake up and start doing a major kep for API machinery
Yeah.
because that's going to be very complicated. But it does not mean that there aren't any other areas in which you can contribute via code to the project. A lot of
Hmm.
the tooling that we have built, for example, the Kubernetes release team and the release engineering sub-project, they built
Hmm.
a tool for releasing Kubernetes called Krell.
Yeah.
Now, Krell is simpler than Kubernetes in nature. So you're still contributing to Kubernetes, you're contributing to the tooling that is building Kubernetes. So a lot of Kubernetes SIGs have projects like these, which are not KK master or not the main Kubernetes master branch. They're different projects. They are like some particular thing to do with nodes, something particular to do with how queues are managed. So there are these other projects as well that you can contribute to, and you can slowly build up to Kubernetes. I would like show them like different SIGs and how you can. So let me just share
Okay.
my screen.
Go ahead.
Okay. Right. Okay, so this is what I'm coming to. First of all, this is a very important tweet that I found from Dims. Dims is a very seasoned contributor in Kubernetes, and he answered this question explicitly. I want to contribute to Kubernetes. How do I get started? So I would recommend taking a look at this because this has some great resources in there, and this mentions things like how do I choose a particular SIG, like the obvious answer is whatever you are interested in, you choose them. So he mentions here the different SIGs that are there in the Kubernetes community. So I have this open already. I can show that. Let me see where it is. Okay. These are the coding conventions. Okay, let's see. Okay, here are the special interest groups. So every special interest group manages some particular component of the ecosystem. So you pick something based on your experience and based on where you wish to contribute to. Now, one thing I would like to say here, if you're not familiar with Kubernetes, for example, if you don't know what controllers are, what deployments are, it isn't likely that you would be able to contribute to code of Kubernetes, like the direct code that is there in Kubernetes. So you need to have some experience, at least with Kubernetes beforehand, before you start contributing to that project. But coming to the SIGs, there are various SIGs. For example, kubectl, there's the SIG CLI for that. There's SIG auth, architecture, apps, API machinery. So go on to these links, click a particular SIG, read their scope, and read the sub-projects that they have. For example, they have a project called cluster add-ons. And if you don't want to contribute to Kubernetes, you can maybe contribute to this project, right? So it's a sub project in the Kubernetes ecosystem that you can contribute to. And there are plenty of projects like these. For example, logical cluster by Kubernetes SIG, cluster lifecycle. And in a lot of others, there's cluster CAPI API provider AWS. right? There's cluster API provider Azure. So there are these different projects that every SIG has, which are related to the main Kubernetes master branch, which is KK master, but they are still different from that project. They would have their different contribution criteria or guidelines. They would have their different coding standards, maybe a bit relaxed than Kubernetes. So you can explore this SIG according to your liking. So whatever area you're interested in, or if you're interested in docs, etcetera, instrumentation, whatever interests you, there are special interest groups. Then there are working groups as well. So working groups aren't as mature as SIGs. They don't really own a piece of code or own a piece in the complete shipping process of Kubernetes, from code to release to documentation, etc. But they are working on ideas towards that. Right? So there are work groups as well that you can kind of participate in and understand what they're doing. And then there are committees in Kubernetes, for example, the code of conduct, the security response committee, the steering committee. So this is the high level structure of how the Kubernetes project works. So if you want to contribute to something, just go on that particular SIG and see what's the area that they have listed over there, the area that they work in, and what are the sub-projects for that particular SIG. For example, a very good issue I remember here is related to some automation that is under SIG architecture for enhancements. So you don't have to contribute to KK master via code. You can also contribute to these sub-projects via code, if that's the thing you're looking forward to, gaining some hands-on experience with Golang or maybe different programming language used in a particular sub-project present inside a SIG. So that's the high-level overview of the various SIGs in the Kubernetes community. And there are some other resources as well. So this is the lifecycle group that we saw. This is the project that we viewed. What's there? I think this is mostly, if you read Dem's tweet, he mentions like a lot of things to go over. For example, browser developer guide, join a SIG. So if you're interested in, let's say, SIG node, find the charter of that SIG. There's another important thing here that is called enhancements. So if you want to view what your SIG is working on right now, you can go to Kubernetes enhancements. So I just searched it on Google. You don't have to remember links. You don't have to remember anything. So just go to enhancements. See, these are the enhancements tracking. This also lists the enhancement tracking board. So it's not listing for 135, but I believe if you change this link to 135, it should take you to the enhancements board. So let's wait for the redirect. Okay, in the meantime, that opens. This is the enhancements sub-project. Any new feature that is going into Kubernetes that meets certain criteria, so that's defined here, is my thing an enhancement, that has to go through a formal enhancement process. So the way this works is you describe your feature, what's it gonna do, and what are the various things related to that feature. And then you push that feature documentation to this particular repo. And these are some of the enhancements in v1.35. For example, there is KML. A lot of people might know about this one who have been following 1.34. So this enhancement was merged in 1.34. Now there was some work to be done in 1.35, and that code has been merged. So you can basically go to this board. Let me open this board, and you can single hand operation. I need to keep the mic.
You can drop the mic. I mean, people will be left to see. Yeah.
So you can go here, you can group by values. So you can see for this cycle, okay, let me cross this. By the way, if you are a Kubernetes community member, the steering committee elections, they close on 25th of October. So please do vote, please exercise your right and make this community a better place. I'll just cross that now. And you can see that various SIGs that are here. So for example, you can see API machinery has 4 KEPs or 4 feature addition to this particular release. SIG apps has 4. So you can basically see what your SIG is working on right now. And Maybe you are someone who is deeply involved in networking and you want to contribute over there. You see that there is a gap called relax validation for service names, and you open it out of curiosity. You read what's there, you read what is to be done, etc., for example, and you reach out to these people. You reach out to them saying, hey, I would love to work on this feature. Can you, and I have read this, a rule of reach out. Whenever you are reaching out to someone, never, ever, ever say them, hey, how can I get started? Hey, how can you explain to me, or can you assign this to me directly? Without the assignment is fine, but don't never reach out saying that, just help me get started on this. That is a very annoying question because of the sheer number of times we receive that question. So don't do that. One thing I said in open source, you have to read things before saying anything or asking for help. My very first open source project that I wanted to work with, I just commented, hey, help me, explain me, like, without doing any research on my own. And the maintainer of that project said that, no, we don't want you. We don't want such a contributor, which was very hurtful at that time, which is still not the best practice a maintainer should follow. And that was wrong on their behalf at that time. But at the same time, maintainers receive a lot of questions like these, how to get started, etc. So whenever you are trying to actually contribute, always do your research beforehand, do your homework. If you show that you have done some work before sending this message, how do I get started, then the chances of you getting a reply and you getting some actual mentorship is a lot higher. So do your research before saying just about anything in the community. So let's say if you are interested in this gap, you read about this gap, you read about some discussion that's maybe going in this particular gap or any of the linked issues, hypothetically speaking. And you see that, this is an interesting idea, but this has this problem. And you say, hey, this idea looks interesting, but I think this idea has this particular problem. So you get involved in the conversation, and that's where you get started. So pick something that you can relate with if you're trying to contribute to code directly to Kubernetes master, and start a conversation or a discussion around there. This is just one of the way to get started contributing to the project. There are a lot of ways that you can do that. For example, another important thing I like to show here is this Kubernetes contributed cheat sheet. So if you go to kubernetes.dev, you would find all these resources there, like the SIGs that are there, the charters, the links to those things, and various tutorials as well. So you basically have to read or watch some videos and do your research to understand things better. The answer you are expecting from someone, how do I get started? Well, that answer is already written over here. And if you read a lot of this or most of it, you would understand how can you get started basically on your own without getting the same generic reply from someone. So it's already almost all of it is documented, at least the getting started steps. Well, there's actually a point that says getting started. So this is the contributor course, this is the contributor guide, this is the developer guide, security and disclosure information. So click these links and read what's in there. Reading is the most important thing to get started. And one more thing I wanted to show here. Let me find that tab. Yep, the community calendar. So if you go to kubernetes.dev/resources/calendar, you would see that there are these meetings that are happening every day for different SIGs. For example, let's say if you are interested in contributing to SIG node, you see that there's a meeting at this particular time for this SIG node meeting. You actually should show up to these meetings. And over there, if you even ask this question, which you shouldn't, by the way, how do I get started contributing? You are more likely to get a response from them when you're asking that in person. I'm not saying do that, don't do that, by the way. But showing up in these meetings help because it's a step ahead than a Slack thread. It's a step that you actually added this meeting to your calendar and you are a more serious contributor who's willing to contribute and you are adhering to the time that the meeting is starting at. So it shows that you are more aligned with the process and you have done some research instead of just sending a DM on the Kubernetes Slack. So join these meetings, show up in these meetings, ask questions. If you're asking a question, there isn't any stupid question, but you should always do your research before asking any question. There aren't any stupid questions, but do your research beforehand. That's the thing. If you don't do your research, then most likely your question is not going to be answered, or if it gets answered, it's not going to get answered in the manner that it should have been. So if you're used to Stack Overflow, I don't know if a lot of people now even remember that. It was a thing in which you would ask questions to actual humans and they would respond with answers. And they had a very strict policy around asking questions. If you said, hey, this is not working, fix it for me, you would get downvoted and your question would be deleted. So you had to make sure that your question adhered to a particular standard, which was, hey, this is not working. I have tried X, Y, Z. I have also seen that some people have done this, but I tried that as well. It didn't work for me. Can someone help me troubleshoot this? So you enumerated your question. You said what you have done. You said, I saw the people doing this. I tried this. It didn't work for me. Can someone help me? So if you ask a more detailed question, people would be happier and they would actually feel good that someone is actually trying to contribute to this SIG rather than just asking a very generic question. So go into any of these meetings, but always do your research beforehand. So this is a very high level overall on how to contribute. Again, read this thread. This is, I think, a very golden thread that Dims has put down. So read this thread and see what it says. It mentions other things as well, like CI. How do you view the PRs you're working on? How does the CI work? Well, that's a different thing. About the release team as well. How do you make a release? Can I participate to learn? Well, hell yeah. So it mentions that as well, and a lot of other things. So this is a really good resource if you want to get started. And a big shout out to Dims for putting this. So this was the basic overview of how you can get started into Kubernetes. And this is more of in general and open source as well. Like a lot of practices are transferable. And Nitish, you wanted to go through the code as well, right?
Yep, that would be awesome.
Yep, I'll do a small demonstration of how I would read code if I do for any open source project. So let me share that. Okay, so I hope you all can see my Goland.
Yep.
So basically I cloned the Kubernetes repo, and this is one of the components. Now, let me just compact or shrink everything. So you see this is the structure of the Kubernetes project. And when I expand it, you see the bar going shrinking, shrinking, and shrinking. There are a lot of files here to go through and figure out what's happening. It's a very large code base indeed. But honestly, never get intimidated by how large a code base is. You don't need to know everything to fix something or to work on something. For example, I'm reading the code of the namespace controller now. I have read this code before, but I read this code today only, like just a few hours before this meeting. And I will exactly mimic how I read this code. So I read the constant declaration, what's here, what does it say? Namespace deletion grace period is a time period to wait before processing a received namespace event. So it's like a grace time period for something. That's what's in my head right now. And these are the conditions that it lists why this is here. This is a good code actually, good code base that is listing this comment. Imagine that this wasn't there and you would have kind of guessed only. So Kubernetes is a very kind code base that the way that it's documented, the code base itself, it helps you a lot. And it actually follows a lot of good code practices. So I read the namespace controller over here. I see that there is something called as a namespace lister. What can a namespace lister probably do? Well, it can list a namespace. So that's what lister does. Lister can list namespaces from a shared cache. Now there is this additional information that was added by the author. Great. Coming to the next thing, returns true when the namespace cache is ready. Well, of course, if you know a bit about programming, for you to use any cache, you have to make sure the cache is ready. For example, if you are caching some pages and then you are reading from that cache, you have to first cache those pages. So this is basically a signal event that you receive and which basically says, okay, now I have cached this thing, you can read from the cache. This, I think, what it basically is. Now next is the queue. Now, queue is a basic data structure that a lot of computer science students should know about. Namespaces that have been queued up for processing by workers. So this is some sort of queue in which namespaces are added for processing. Okay, makes sense. Namespace resources deleter, helper to delete all resources in the namespace when the namespace is deleted. So this is some kind of helper which delete all the resources in the namespace when the namespace is to be deleted. Okay, makes sense till now. New namespace controller. Of course, if you're familiar with Golang, a lot of these patterns you can recognize. So this is a pattern in which they have defined an object and then they are creating a new instance of that object, right? So this is a pattern a lot of Go programmers would recognize. And for example, passing context, which is a standard thing in Golang and stuff like that. So you need to have some familiarity with Golang, of course, if you want to contribute to Kubernetes. So build that familiarity. I think there are a lot of resources out there to learn Golang. I think you also put out like a video recently, Nitish, around
Yep,
Golang, like
I did.
interfaces. Yeah. So watch that video. All right, so coming to the next things, there's the Kubernetes client that is being passed, some metadata related with the client, discover resources function. What does this function do? This function returns back an array of API resource list. So it's returning some kind of resources and discovering those resources. That's what this function does basically. So whenever you're trying to read code, try to read code as what the author probably means without knowing each and everything. So when I was reading the queue, I did not check what's the implementation of the queue, why it is a typed rate limiting interface. I was like, this is some kind of a queue, because I was trying to read this as pseudocode. So I'll quickly go through other things. Then there's this namespace informer. Now you need to be aware of some terminologies like informer, resync, caching, controller, these basic terminologies. So informer would basically make sure that any events that are incoming, it would put those events to the cache. So that's what the informer basically is doing here. So what it does is that it adds an event handler with a resync period. So for every resync period, or basically after every duration of time, this function is configured to run, and it has these hooks as well. So add function, and it has some logic under add function. So how I would basically read this right now is there's some sort of resync mechanism in which events are received, and based on those events, some work is done. What's that work? If an add function type of event is maybe received, then the program does this work. If an update function type of event is received, the program does this work. And there's a resync period. So I believe this is level based, in which it constantly receives, but it also rechecks. Like it is based on, I think, events, and at the same time resync period as well. That's what I'm thinking about this right now. I might not be fully correct, but you don't have to be fully correct to understand like a basic piece of code. A lot of things slowly build. When you start reading code, it's like, now understand it a bit. The next time you read it, you understand a few more components better. You go through the tests, you know the components even better. So you slowly build on it. It's not something that would come to you immediately. So you slowly kind of build on how to read that code. And then it basically, then it basically assigns these things to the things that were in the object, right? Returns the namespace controller. Now, how I would read this is that I'm assuming there must be a central method that is being run, and I would try to trace the code path from there. So let's see if there's a central method like that. Well, Golang is a nice IDE. It shows you which interface this is implementing. So I see it's implementing the controller interface, and controller interface has a run method. So I should probably look at the run method of this function, of this particular module. So I see the run function. Util runtime handle crash with context. So some crash handling is there. Some cleanup of resources is there. Creating a logger, logging something. Another log statement here. Wait for name cache sync with context. So this condition is basically waiting if the cache is up to date. I think that's what it means. And then it logs something else. And then it starts with the actual work that it is doing, and it waits until the context is done. So now I'm reading this, I would see, okay, go.wait until with context. So it's waiting. I think this time.second is the period for this. And then it is calling a function in the queue called worker. Let's take a look at the worker function. Okay, so worker processes queue of namespace objects. Each namespace can be in the queue at most once. The system ensures that no two workers process the same namespace at the same time. That's a good thing to know, that there is some synchronization here. And how I would read this is basically, this is the function, and this function is being called continuously until it returns a favorable value, which is a Boolean in this case, I believe. And if it's true, then it returns, otherwise it keeps retrying here. So that's the basic logic here. Okay, what is this function doing? It gets the key from the queue. It has a defer statement to mark that as done. Sync namespace from key. What does this function do? Sync namespace from key, looks for a namespace with a specified key in the store and synchronizes it. So it's basically doing some key lookup, and I think synchronizes here means not the synchronization you think in terms of programming, in terms of mutexes, etc. It's about synchronizing the state. So expected state of this particular namespace is deleted, and whether it's actually deleted or not. So then it gets the, if it returns an error, it typecasts that error into resource remaining error. So if there are some resources that are yet to be deleted in that namespace, there is something like, it says content remaining namespace, and with the wait time for that content to be deleted. Because I know this much about namespaces in Kubernetes from me learning about Kubernetes, for example, that while namespace is being deleted, first the objects in that namespace would be deleted in an ordered way. For example, the pods would be deleted first, and then the network policies for those pods would be deleted, and so on and so forth. And when all of that inside that box or that namespace is cleared, then only this box would be discarded. So this logic basically is trying to do that. If it's not that error, it basically says that, hey, namespace deletion failed. And that's the basic logic that this thing is running. And there was this add function of in-queuing namespace as well. So let's see what it's doing. Don't queue if we aren't deleted. So if a namespace is not to be deleted, it is not in-queued in the namespace controller. Makes sense. You don't want to delete a namespace which is not meant to be deleted. So that condition is there. So this is how I would basically overall read a code. Now this is a very short piece of code. Namespace controller is like 214 lines, in which logic is what, 150 lines or odd, something like that. So it's a very short controller to read, but still gives you an idea of how I would go about reading this code. I haven't read this code before. I just saw this code today, a few minutes before the actual meeting with Nitish, and that's how I read this. Do I know each and everything about this piece of code? No, hell no, I don't. There are a lot of things to be explored, but if I'm working on a feature that's related to this piece of code, this is the first thing that I will do. I will try to understand what this code basically means. So try to read this as pseudocode. What this is trying to do, what's the actual algorithm behind it, or what might be the algorithm behind it. You don't need to care how is something being added to the queue after this time duration, because there might be a timer or a ticker that's ticking down, and when that ticker ticks down, it might be adding that thing to that particular queue, and the implementation detail of that would be might be fairly technical, but you don't have to care about that. You can just use that as an abstraction. For example, if you are using an array list in Java, you don't care how the array list internally works. Of course, at a conceptual level, you should know, but you don't every time go and look up the code of array list. You just assume that this is an API that works in this particular manner. Assuming is a very much required thing for contributing to every open source project. You have to assume that certain functions do what they say without digging too deep into the implementation. You dig into the implementation eventually, but not right off the bat. So that's something very important to keep in mind. You don't need to know everything. You can assume things work in the manner that they are written to work in, and you just focus on the thing that you're working on. For example, there might be a bug here. If this statement wasn't there, for example, I would just see, okay, if this is this type of error, then it does this. But wait a minute. What if the error is not nil and the error is not of this particular type? Well, that case isn't being handled. So, hey, let me add this piece of code. Do I need to know what the actual implementation of this queue is to add this particular piece of code? Maybe not. I don't need to know. but still I added this piece of code. So you don't need to know everything to fix something. That's the basic idea here. And let's take a look at some tests here as well. Okay, so let's take a look at some tests. So this is for namespace resource deleter, which is being called by namespace controller. And there's a very simple test in this. Unit tests are very good to understand the flow of code. If you have any unit test and you want to understand how the code works, just add a breakpoint to that unit test. Now I am on Golang. You can do it in your IDE, or you can do it on terminal as well. Like a lot of things like NeoVim, etc. They have extensions for things like these. But if you're probably using NeoVim, you already know how to add breakpoints and stuff. So I see what this function is doing. Test retry on conflict error. I see it creating a mock client, number of tries. What this function is doing, number of tries plus plus. If it's less than this, it returns a new error. Otherwise, it returns nil. So maybe this is some kind of function that returns an error once, and after that, it doesn't return an error if it's run again, because we are incrementing the global state. Okay, that's what it basically means. Now I want to see what this function does. I don't have any idea. I just go, and I would debug this function. And now I've added a breakpoint, so I can see where this function is. No tests were found. Okay. I hope you can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay. Where's Golang? Here's Golang. Okay, debug. Now this should work. So it's compiling. It'll take a while to compile, I feel. Okay, now I have the actual breakpoint, and you can see what's the actual value of all the objects here as well. Like you can see what's D here. D is the namespace resource deleter. Okay, what's the thing in it? There's no finalizer token. These things all are nil. The namespace client is actually a fake client or a mock client. That's another like programming paradigm you should be familiar with, that there's some mocking done in Kubernetes, because well, you have to test things locally without setting up a full-blown cluster. I have all the other variables here defined. You can inspect them. Every like debugger has a way to do this thing. Golang has it inbuilt, so pretty neat, but you don't need to use Golang. It's a paid ID, so that's why I'm saying you don't need to use Golang. You can probably just work well enough with VS Code, or maybe even without VS Code as well. So let's just get into this function. This is just the background. Now let's get into the actual function. Okay, so this is the actual function. Now I would see the execution flow statement by statement. Okay, I see the latest namespace. It's creating a new variable, and it's in a for loop. Okay, it's executing the function that was passed to this thing, the retry function that we have, I think here. That is the one being passed. Okay, so this function would now be executed over here. And I think this function should return an error because it's running for the first time. Okay, so error is not nil. Error is not conflict. Well, it is conflict because from here we know it's returning errors.newConflict. And it assigns the previous namespace over here, and it gets the latest namespace from the client. And if error is not nil, well, this error is actually nil, so that's fine. It keeps going after conflict. It tries again. That's why it's in a for loop, and that's why the name of the function is retry on conflict error. So this condition should pass, and let's see the flow again. Oh, the error is nil this time because that's how a test was configured to work. And now this returns nil. I come back and I see everything is good. And okay, this is Golang testing right now. You don't need to really be concerned about. And I see the test pass. Now I basically know the flow of this function called retry on conflict error. Pretty small function. You can most probably read it without a test case, but I just wanted to show that you can use breakpoints in test cases and unit tests to see what's happening. And this is general debugging tips. You can use log statements, you can use breakpoints, you can set up a proxy for a few things. For example, if you're monitoring network traffic or something, you can set up a MITM proxy, or you can set a profiler if you want to see what's the actual resource usage by your thing. You can even see not just resource usage, but the times that Go routines are being plugged in Golang by configuring the profiler in that way. So there are plenty of ways to debug code. I'm not really here to talk about that. So that's a basic idea. Like these are the basic things that you can use to understand a code base better. Is it gonna come to you in one day? No. No. 2 days? No. 3 days? Maybe. So that's how it goes. Like if it's a fairly complicated thing, it would take very long. And I remember my first open source actual decent PR, which was some logical changes. It took me more than 2 weeks to just understand the code and add that logical condition. And after that, there were a lot of edge cases I had to handle around the logical condition, etc. So it took me 2 weeks to understand that code base back in college because I wasn't familiar with what's happening. I assumed a few things. I assumed that they work in the manner that they are supposed to be in. And then 2 weeks after, I understood it more than the day I started. And that's how it is. So it would always be like an uphill climb in the initial days, but slowly and slowly it gets better.
If anyone wants to probably start to any project, you mentioned like a really good way on understanding things. And I think one thing that would be really helpful for people is to try to understand the fundamentals of the programming language
All
and
right.
especially go deep into topics like concurrency, as we were seeing, go into the mocking stuff, like we were using mock clients, right?
All
I
right.
think that would be really good. But yeah, really, really appreciate that you presenting it. And in fact, I learned a lot, like how you were doing that. So I really appreciate that. Um, let's come to the like few last questions I have. Is a lot of people try to, as you mentioned, about go to people, go to the maintainers, ask them how to get started, or probably ask for some advice. And it's very common that
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people don't get a response from the maintainers, and that's very obvious. Like, why would someone want to guide you or maintain, like, mentor you? So,
Yeah.
any tips on how to find mentors or guidance within the community?
Yeah. I receive a lot of those messages. Can you help me get started? If I'm
Yeah,
having a really good day, I would respond to those messages. But most of the times I don't.
yeah.
And if I do, I just paste a link to kubernetes.dev. Hey, just go and read what's on this website. I'm not explaining it any further. Like people ask, what are the tips that can help me, give me a push or give me a fast forward start to this? It's not a race. Why do you need a push or a fast forward start? Are you racing
Mm,
someone? So I think very important thing here is you should be genuinely interested in contributing to that thing. And contributing is not easy to any open source project. You require a lot of persistence. And by a lot, I mean a lot. It depends on your level. So now I feel I am comfortable enough to go to any Golang code base and probably make a PR for something that is probably bugging me or irritating me or I am facing some bug. I can understand that code and I can fix most of the Golang code bases that are out there, if not all. So I feel I am comfortable with the language enough, but that didn't happen in one day. That took very long. So a lot of persistence is required when you're trying to contribute. And specifically on finding mentors, what I would suggest is that observe what a lot of people in the community are doing. When you observe what's happening in general, you get to know what's the actual way things are being done in this community. After that, if those people, let's say you joined a particular meeting, they are discussing a problem, and you're like, hey, I would be very keen to work on this problem. I understand the basic premise of this problem, and I would be very keen in contributing and fixing this problem. Now, they were discussing that problem. You said that I can probably fix this problem. Now they know that you are curious. You have been in these meetings for a few times and you are actually wanting to contribute to this project. So they would acknowledge you as a potential contributor. It's really important to be acknowledged as a potential contributor to the project. So you have to get to that level first, that where you would be acknowledged by the maintainer that, okay, this person has potential to be a long time contributor to this project and is not doing this because of some silly open source program that is running. Well, wink, wink, you know which that program is. Um,
I I get that. Yeah,
yeah, the README, adding commas, etc. Those kind of nonsense things.
happened a
Um,
lot in the Express.js, Yeah.
yeah, it's Express.js. I mean, I'm sorry, Express.js. I am deeply
Yeah.
sorry for what's been happening to you. Anyways, you have to get to a level where you are recognized as a potential contributor. When you're at that level and you're working on a particular feature, it's very natural for you to not understand everything, face errors, and make mistakes, write bad code, etc. That's the job of reviewers. And when they start reviewing your code, they become your mentors in a way. They tell you, hey, this is wrong with your code, you should do it like this. And I've had it so many times, hey, you have implemented this is logically correct, but there's a better way of doing this, or there's a cleaner way of writing this thing of code. And I have open PRs which receive like 200s of these comments. Do this like this, do this like these. And my mentor said to me that I am only doing this because I know you would love to know these things. If you were not putting equal amounts of efforts as I am, I wouldn't be doing this at all.
Yeah.
This happened in a very recent open source project I contributed to. So they knew that I was serious about it, and then they were. So you have to get serious about it. Watch a podcast like this, maybe watch another one. But if you're just watching podcasts, you're not fooling anyone. You're just bullshitting around and you won't learn anything. So you cannot start to learn drawing by just watching drawing videos. You have to actually pick up pen and paper and start drawing. So same as with open source. You cannot learn contributing to open source without actually reading those issues, writing some code, pushing it around. So CI is failing, work around that. So you have to go through this natural process. May it be any open source project, Kubernetes or whatever.
That's very good advice, Cap.
Yeah, be serious about it. Is as simple as that. When you're serious about it, things would automatically happen for you.
I believe like the thing that I feel like if you have come across maintainers or reviewers who are telling you how to write this code in a better way, I feel like those are one of the best
Mm.
maintainers to probably work with because now
Oh
you're
wow, hands
getting
down, hands.
exactly cool.
Yeah,
That's a very good suggestion. We're going to have few rapid fire questions for you, probably 4 to 5. You don't have to
yeah,
think
sure.
like you probably
Go
can think
ahead.
for like 3 seconds.
Oh
And
yeah, 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 yeah.
all right, the first one would be favorite Kubernetes sig.
Securities, of course. I've worked in securities for the longest.
kubectl apply or kubectl create.
Apply depends on whether I'm doing server side or client side. I wrote an article about kubectl apply and how it differentiates the server side or client side. I would use apply more than create.
Got it. Tabs or spaces?
Huh?
Tabs or spaces?
I hate them both. You cannot distinguish whether it's a tab or a space inside the editor. You have to
Well,
actually select whether that's depends on the encoding. If you have UTF-8, it wouldn't be visible to you, but if you have something else,
sometimes you get the error like when you use the tabs, but you won't get error when you're using the
well, tabs are
spaces.
not universal. Tabs can mean 8 spaces or more than in
Yeah.
different types of things. So I'm not a big fan of tabs. I'm not a big fan of spaces either. JSON,
Yeah.
structured content, or KML is what I go for.
Okay. One open source project everyone should check out other than Kubernetes.
Check style. Shout out to my OG
Oh,
boys.
I
Check style.
started contributing to check, not started contributing. I went to the project in my freshman year too. I
I
I
remember.
looked at your contribution. It was like pretty good, and I did I would say like the basic stuff. I got lashed out I think by maintainers.
Mm.
It was like such a bad thing, but now when I go back to the East, I feel like there's a long way.
You
We
know,
have
I
come
would
across.
take this moment to give shout out to a few more open source projects. Take a look at Minder. Minder is really cool. Minder is an
Okay,
open source supply chain security platform. It's really cool. It's in a way ahead of the requirement right now that's in the industry, but you should really check that out if you're focused on supply chain security. Check Guac out. Guac is really good. Check Intoto, of course. It's a graduated project. So these are a lot of other projects that I would get shout out to. Intoto, GitHub, there's this one project, I'm not remembering the name of that right now, but I found that pretty interesting as well. It was related to MCP, but it's not coming to me right now. But these are like
agent,
my
something like
interests
that.
wouldn't be your interests, so find your own interests. But these
Okay,
are some projects I would suggest you look
were you talking like were you gonna say about K agent? Because that was also related to something around MCP.
at. No, it's something called I think Tool Hive.
Okay, got
Um,
it. Got it. Okay. One underrated Kubernetes feature.
One underrated Kubernetes feature. My head goes to policies straight away. But I feel a lot of people are using policies, but I don't feel a lot of people are using runtime policies. Now, runtime policies are not Kubernetes native, but I think you should be using runtime policies more often. And although your question is different, but I take the liberty to answer differently.
I think
um,
there's also something called as Kubernetes multi-cluster, SIG multi-cluster that's coming right now. That's
OSI
also, I heard
clusters
it's
have existed for very long.
not SIG multi-cluster, but there's something that was discussed at KubeCon London. It was by Stephen and some other guy. Uh, yeah, so that's also like a new feature that's coming in, and I see a lot of people are interested in that too. Yeah.
There are plenty of features in Kubernetes, and
Mm.
my day job is not Kubernetes, so you should know that.
Yeah.
I would strongly suggest you to have runtime policies for your workloads running on Kubernetes.
Hmm.
That's something I feel people don't do that often, and that's very important because right now the vulnerability scenario is such that you don't know what your binary is going to execute or how do you
Yeah.
test structure binary. Like signing is good, of course, but signing can be like tampered with. You can initiate, you can pollute the source code, then the signing doesn't make any sense. So signing does not, signing only tells you about integrity. Signing does not tell you about the behavior of that project. So runtime policies, I think, are a must for any Kubernetes cluster administrator, and you should add runtime policies to your projects or to your
Got it.
environment.
Got it. Okay. And one last one is one word advice for new contributors.
Um, One word, right?
Yeah. Is it going to be read or something?
Feed? What?
Read.
Oh, read. I thought you said
Yeah.
weed. I'm like, what
No.
the hell? Oh no. Um, so read's pretty good, but I'm trying to think of something else. Now, this is not rapid fire in nature, but I'm thinking of a very good thing that you should really focus on. Read is, of course, there. I think the word would be persistence.
Hmm.
That has to be the thing. I think that's what I did, and I think it's two things. It's persistence and it's being confident in your abilities or backing yourself up. Sometimes we are very doubtful of, hey, maybe I cannot do this. This seems too complicated for me. Just know that you are capable of doing that and be persistent about it and be confident in your own abilities. So those are the two things I would say to anyone who's starting out.
That's a really good one. And I think we're almost done with the session now. So once again, I thank you for joining in.
No worries,
And
Manish.
in case you guys like this video, make sure you connect with Vyom as well. All the links for the social platforms will be given in the description. So, and make sure you don't spam his Slack DMs as well. That,
I
things
mean, you
like
can
that.
spam my Slack DMs. I won't reply.
Yeah.
Spam as much as you want. Go
Okay.
ahead. Set up bot accounts to spam my Slack DMs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, once again, thanks for joining in. It's really a pleasure to have you. And I personally learned a lot of things. Thanks for
Well, you yourself are pretty experienced, so
No, not
glad
really.
you learned something. Okay, cool.